Every year needs to have some highlights. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I'm taking you through all of the books that were released in 2022 and that I read in 2022 that I absolutely adored. There are a couple of romances on this list, there are a couple of contemporary books, there are a couple of non-fiction books, but all of them were released from January to December of last year. Let's take a look at what some of those books were. First one on the list is Again Rachel by Marian Keyes. I think this is the first 2022 release that I read in 2022, but I absolutely was blown away by this. I think this was probably one of my favorite books of the entire year, and it's definitely the best sequel that I've read all year. This follows Rachel from Rachel's Holiday, but 25 years after the events of Rachel's Holiday, where Rachel, who was once heavily dependent on drugs, who was once a very strong cocaine user, party animal, heavy drinker, is now completely living clean. She is actually a therapist in the rehab center that she first went to 25 years ago to clean up her life and to get back on track. But now things are starting to happen from her old life back then. People are starting to come back into her life and things are kind of starting to unravel, and there is a slight chance that she's going to go back to her old ways. I really love how much heart Marian puts into all of her books, and this one was especially heart-wrenching. There are some really harrowing and some really heartbreaking scenes that are in this book. There are some trigger warnings for, of course, drug use, of course, drug abuse, but also for grief, bereavement, stillbirth, child loss, pregnancy, miscarriage. And I absolutely was so heartbroken by this book, but also it's filled with all of the warmth, all of the love, all of the care that Marian puts into all of her other books, as well as the slightly dysfunctional Walsh family themselves, who have now expanded over the 25 years since we last saw them. I absolutely loved this book, and I cannot wait to see what Marian's next book is going to be. Next up is another book by an Irish author, and this is Idle by Louise O'Neill. This came out in May of last year, but I read it in March with Michelle from Michelle's Library as a buddy read, and both of us were so blown away by this book. Louise O'Neill is one of my favourite authors at the moment, so I knew that I was in good hands with her, but I don't think I expected just how much this book was going to completely spellbind me. In this book, you're following Sam, who is a social media influencer, and she has just reached about 3 million followers on her Instagram. And to mark this, she is writing an essay about one of her first sexual experiences with one of her best friends from when they were in high school. But said best friend writes into her agency and says that everything that happened wasn't as consensual as Sam is remembering it. Lisa doesn't remember it being as consensual as previously. It wasn't something that she had wanted to do. And then there is an entire discussion about victim blaming, about victim shaming, about whose story are you going to believe, Sam's or Lisa's. And then, of course, there's the truth that is dotted in between their two stories. Also, on the other side, you have got a whole discussion about social media, about culture of influencers, and how much of a pedestal we can put these people on, how that fall from grace can affect them, and how swift and how quick it can be for some of these people. I really enjoyed this book. It's such a cutting look at social media, about how much we put an importance onto it, about how much of a pedestal we can put these social media influencers on, and it definitely will make you look and think about how much you are using social media yourself, about how much of your life you're putting out there. It's definitely a book that I think everybody should read. Next up was the first of a series, two of which came out in 2022, but I think I preferred the first one a little bit to the second one, and that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a sapphic love story between Delilah and Claire. Delilah grew up in a small town called Bright Falls, but left it for New York about 10 years ago, and she's now working as a photographer, but she has been called back to Bright Falls by her stepsister Astrid. Astrid is getting married, and Delilah has been asked to be the photographer for the wedding, but also to be there for about 2 weeks beforehand to get like the bachelorette party or the dress fittings and just get some pictures before the wedding starts anyway. While Delilah is there, she also meets with Claire, who is one of Astrid's best friends. She's one of the bridesmaids. Claire is a single mother. She and the father of her child are still somewhat in contact, but it's not the same rosy relationship that they would have had previously. And Delilah used to have a thing for Claire back when they were younger. And now that they are back together, sparks are really starting to fly between the two of them. I absolutely adored this story. It's so heartwarming, it's so wonderful, but it's also a little bit steamy at times as well. And that is definitely something that I'm starting to look for a little bit more in romance books. So I think this was just the perfect book for me to read. Next up is Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This was Rachel's second adult book, and in last year I not only read Weather Girl, but I also read The X Talk, which was previously published and I hadn't gotten to it already. I read Weather Girl first, and I absolutely adored it. I really loved the relationship between Ari and Russell, who are both working in a local TV station, and their bosses, who have divorced from one another, are making things a little bit difficult to be in the studio. Ari is a weather girl and is working as a kind of an assistant or an intern to Torrance, and Russell is on the sports team and he works with Seth. So Ari and Russell decide that to make things a little bit less frosty in the office, they're going to try and get Torrance and Seth back together in a kind of a parent trap style thing. They want them to see how good their times were together, they want them to see how good their lives were together, and maybe if they start to remember the good times, things are going to start to thaw between the two of them and everybody is going to have a much happier work environment to come into. Of course, while they are kind of getting Seth and Torrance back together, Ari and Russell start to develop feelings for each other themselves. It's such a gorgeous friends to lovers story, but also what I really loved about this book is that it has great plus size representation for the male character this time, and that isn't something that I have seen quite a lot of in books, so it was something that I really enjoyed reading, especially because you get to see a lot of Russell's anxieties and a lot of his kind of hang-ups about his body and about his size and his appearance. It's not something that you see quite a lot from a male perspective, so seeing that was really a breath of fresh air for me. Next up was Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. This is their debut book, I think, and it has one thing in this book that is such a pull factor for me that every single time I see it, I read it. Food, cooking shows, MasterChef, Bake Off, anything that has to do with like cooking or food or enjoying food, and I am all over it. This book follows London and Dahlia, who are two contestants on an upcoming series of one of the country's biggest cooking shows, and they are both on it to prove their worth, but for different reasons for both of them. London is the show's first ever non-binary contestant, and they really want to use this opportunity to help people normalize using they/them pronouns or interacting with non-binary people in culture. And also they want to do it to kind of prove a point to their father that this is their life now, this is who they are, this is the lives that they are living, and this is the acceptance that they would like their father to show them. Dahlia is here because she has just come out of a divorce with her high school sweetheart, and she feels like in this marriage she completely lost who she was. She isn't really sure who she is anymore, so coming on the cooking show is going to give her a bit of a better sense of self. And while things start to heat up on screen, things also start to heat up between Dahlia and London off screen, and I absolutely adored that aspect of it. I really loved how steamy the scenes were, but also that they were written with so much care to involve a non-binary character and to keep them true to their non-binary identity while also showing their sexual side. I absolutely loved this book, and I know that Anita Kelly has got another book coming out in May or June of this year. I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Next up is Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and I know that this can be quite a divisive book. I know that a lot of people think this is not a contemporary romance, this is more so of like a literary fiction or a contemporary book, but I really loved it for what it was. Yes, okay, you've got the love story between Nora and Charlie, and I don't feel like that is the biggest part of this book, I will agree there. Nora is a publishing editor and Charlie works in a rival firm as a kind of a commissioning editor. And Nora and her sister go away for a month to a little town that is kind of the focus of one of their favorite TV shows. They're going to do a couple of tours. They're going to walk around on what is the set and acknowledge that, oh, this is the coffee shop that everybody goes to, or this is where they hold all the town meetings. And while they're there, Nora keeps bumping into Charlie. And it turns out Charlie comes from this area. Nora and Charlie have had a really frosty relationship. They had an interaction a couple of years ago that did not go well at all, but now that they are starting to see each other almost every single day, things are really starting to thaw out between them. As I said, there's the love story between Nora and Charlie, but there is also the love story of a sister relationship between Nora and her sister Libby. They haven't spent a lot of time together, they haven't really seen each other over the last few years. Libby is married, she has children, her life is kind of going in a different direction. Nora is still living in New York, and they feel like this is a kind of a good time to reconnect with each other. Also, their mother has passed away, and Nora is kind of feeling that little family ties that she needs to build up a little bit more. So she's definitely seeing this as a time to get back together with her sister and to reconnect and to rediscover their relationship. I really loved the sister vibes in this book. I haven't got a sister myself, so anytime that I see that in books, it's like a kind of a connection for me. I kind of like live vicariously through it. So this was definitely a great read for me. Next up is one that will kind of bring the vibe down a little bit, and that was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Everybody read this book last year. I listened to it as an audio book, and I think that that was probably the best way to have done it, because Jeanette tells her story herself, and you can hear the emotion in her voice. You can hear just how much this tumultuous and abusive relationship with her mother has influenced her and has impacted her so heavily over her life. I was kind of growing out of my Nickelodeon and my Disney Channel phase as Jeanette McCurdy started to come to fame. I never really saw Sam and Cat, I think it's called, but I had seen a couple of episodes of iCarly, so I knew who she was. But when you read this book and when you hear about how difficult her life has been, both personally and professionally, it really does hit, and it really does leave a mark with you. There are some passages of this book that I just remember reading with my mouth hanging wide open. It has given me a whole new way of looking at how celebrities are treated both on camera and off camera, both by us, the lay people, or by the people that they are working with. I have so much respect and so much admiration for Jeanette for having been able to get through everything that she had been through in her whole life, and for having the courage to sit down and to tell us her story. Next is another nonfiction book, and it's another celebrity memoir, and this is Over the Hills and Far Away by Nikki Smedley. This is a name that might not mean anything to you, but she was on our TV screens pretty much every single day in the late 90s and early noughties, because Nikki Smedley was the voice and the puppeteer of Lala, one of the Teletubbies. The Teletubbies were absolutely massive around the late 90s, early noughties. I think every house that had young children was completely littered with their toys or with the plush animals or things like that, or had DVDs or VCR tapes of all of the episodes. When I saw this book on NetGalley, I immediately jumped on it, and I'm so glad that I did. I got an audiobook copy of it from NetGalley, and I just listened to it one day, and I loved listening to Nikki telling us about the audition process for how she became Lala. She mentions Anne Wood, who is one of the big names of Ragdoll Productions. I think she was the CEO or the managing director, and she was responsible for so much of my childhood that just even hearing that name was such a little comfort blanket for me. I absolutely loved this. It takes you through the audition process, it takes you through the filming process, the reaction that people had to the Teletubbies, not just over here, but I think also she said there was a huge market for them in Southeast Asia and in Australia and in the US. So anywhere that she went, she would have just been bombarded with questions about Lala, with questions about the Teletubbies. And it was so interesting to hear about what Teletubby land was like. I think it was a little tiny village somewhere in Norwich or Norfolk. And it was so wonderful to hear what it was like for them to have to come to the set every single day and interact with each other and see all of these giant rabbits running around everywhere. It really did bring me back to my childhood for a little bit, and it was such a lovely, comforting book. I think everybody should read it. Next up is The Wedding Crasher by Mia Sosa. And I don't think it would be remiss of me to say that one of the main reasons I read this book is Brianna from Four Paws in a Book not shutting up about it. She spent pretty much all of 2022, from August to about November, telling me to pick this book up and to read it. So eventually when November came around, I knew, okay, I'll give it a go. I'll try it out and I'll see how I feel about it. And I was hooked. It is such a great love story between Solange and Dean. The book opens on Dean's wedding day, and he's about to get married to a woman named Ella. But Solange, who is the wedding planner or is involved in the wedding in some way, overhears Ella telling people that she's not entirely sure that this is the man for her. She doesn't really want to go through with the wedding. And so Solange, when the opportunity arises during the ceremony, gets them to call the wedding off. It turns out that this was a marriage of convenience. Dean needed to get married for further front in his career. So Solange decides that because she had caused all of the chaos in that, she is going to pretend to be Dean's wife, Dean's girlfriend, and come to all of these events and all of these things that he needs to have a partner for. Of course, fake dating always turns into real life dating and real life feelings, and I absolutely loved watching that happen. But something else that I really loved about this book is how much Solange's family is involved in it. Solange's family are Brazilian. So there are so many heavy influences of Brazilian culture. There's a lot of Portuguese in this book. There is a lot of Brazilian food mentioned in here. And you can just see how tight-knit her family is all together, especially when one of her cousins goes into labor. And the entire family basically drops everything and just heads straight for the hospital with like picnic baskets and with crochet that they need to do to keep them company while the baby is being born. I absolutely loved this book. It also has so many laugh out loud moments. There's one particular scene that is so far-fetched but also so well done and so really well written that the absurdity of it didn't really cross my mind. I was just invested in reading it. I also have a copy of The Worst Best Man on my shelf behind me, and I am definitely going to make that a priority for this year because I know that Mia Sosa's writing works for me. And last up is Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh. I think I read this at the perfect time of year. I read it going into Christmas, but also I read it while I myself was on a plane home from where I live now back to Ireland to see my family. That's the main point of this story between Andrew and Molly, who have been living in Chicago for about 8 to 10 years, and both of them meet up to come back home to Ireland on the last flight out before Christmas Eve. However, this year there is a huge storm over the Atlantic and every flight out of Chicago to Dublin has been cancelled. Because Andrew is a huge fan of Christmas and because Molly's sister is in labour and this might be the last time that she gets to see her before the baby, or the baby might be on its way already, Molly and Andrew embark on this huge, like 36-hour, 4-country trip just to get back from Chicago to Dublin in one piece. I absolutely loved the antics that they were going through. I sat on the plane back over to Dublin, so thankful that I never had to go through any of the loopholes or jump through any of the hoops that Molly and Andrew had to do. It really did make me a little bit more thankful that my journey was a lot more streamlined and that the worst thing I had to go through was a huge line at airport security. Catherine Walsh is one of my favourite writers at the moment. She doesn't write very steamy romance, which is definitely a big pull for me, but I didn't really miss it this time. I didn't feel like it was missing when I was reading this book, so I'm definitely going to be picking up any more books that she's got coming out. Those were all the 2022 releases that really caught my eye in 2022 when I was reading them. What was your favourite new release that you read last year? If you'd like to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything that you would like to say, then just leave me the smiling face hearts emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.